Hi everyone, it's Carol from Discover Interior Design, and I'm so glad you're here. In this video, we're going to be talking about patterns, so an overview of pattern and how we use that in our homes. So let's get started. So pattern really is just all about repetition. So it's repeating an element, which we can refer to as a motif. So some sort of design that is repeated throughout an area. And, it could be just one motif, one little design that's repeated, or it could be a grouping of different elements that are repeated throughout a whole design. And repetition and pattern are part of that design principle of rhythm. So they provide some sort of visual movement in a room. There are many ways to create a pattern, and that's really where we go back to the design elements of color and shape and line and texture, and using those to provide repetition of something, whether it's, repeating a color or repeating lines or shapes. And stylistically, we can think of pattern in a couple different categories. We can think of geometric patterns where it's all about geometric shapes or lines, or even naturalistic patterns where we see leaves or branches or flowers. But we can also think about abstract shapes. So areas that are maybe just all about line and color. And then common areas where we would see pattern in our home would be on fabric or wallpaper or even on tile. And we can even think about an area rug where we would see a pattern, or even certain types of rugs where, there's a pattern that's integral to that entire rug design. So one thing to keep in mind when we're working with pattern is size and scale. So size just has to do with the size of something. So when we're looking at a pattern, the size of that motif or that grouping of little elements that are repeated to create a pattern, and then the overall pattern itself. But scale has to do with the relationship between one size to another size. And so when we are selecting a pattern for a piece of furniture or flooring or walls, wherever that may be, keeping in mind the size and scale and how those relationships work together will create a certain look and feel. When we use larger patterns on objects or on walls, when we use larger patterns, just because of how we perceive things, how we see things, that is going to make that object or that element in the room seem to come closer to us. It will have a lot of visual weight, because when we see things that are larger, we automatically assume that that object is closer to us. And it's just how we perceive things. And when we have a smaller pattern on an object or on a wall, wherever that is, that seems to be farther away from us. So for instance, on a sofa, if you put a very large pattern on it, that's going to grab our attention a lot. It's going to have what we call visual weight, a lot of visual weight, a lot of heavy visual weight grabbing our attention. And it's going to feel like and look to us like it's, coming towards us. It's really going to grab our attention. And if we changed out that fabric on a sofa with a smaller pattern, that's going to kind of go away a little bit more and feel like it's a little bit farther away. When we're working with pattern and thinking about, the size and scale of things, we also want to think about, color and contrast and lightness and darkness and all these other things that go into creating designs, creating things that we either notice more or that are more subtle. So there's always this combination of different factors that go into how we see things. So one thing to keep in mind when you're working with pattern fabric is thinking about how that fabric is going to look depending on where you're going to place it. So for instance, if you're going to place it on a piece of furniture, that's great because we can look at the pattern where it's stretched out and flat and see that pattern really well and have a good idea of how that would look on a sofa or on a throw pillow even, or a chair. But if we decide to use that fabric on a curtain or a drapery, something where it has folds in it, well, we're going to keep in mind that that pattern is going to look different. We may not see all of the pattern, or it's going to, change it just because there are going to be all these folds in the fabric. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're working with pattern fabric. Another thing we can think about when using pattern is that we can use different patterns together. And, a couple things you can keep in mind is just to add variety is to use different types of patterns together. So for instance, use a floral pattern with a stripe pattern. And also use different sizes and scales. So if you're using a floral pattern and want to use another pattern with that, use something that's a little smaller or larger so that there is contrast and variety. So when you're working with different types of patterns, keep in mind that you want to still tie them together, and maybe that's a color or the motif itself, something there that they have in common, so it's all tied in and creating a cohesive look. So having pattern in a room or in our homes is really beneficial because it provides two main things. One thing to think about is that it provides variety, so that not everything is just one solid color. There's some contrast there, and going back to rhythm and movement. And so creating some visual movement and some visual interest in an area or different parts of a room. And then also, having a pattern brings in other colors. So, it provides some variety just by bringing in some opposite or accent colors that we may not have thought of right away. And then the other side of that, it also creates a cohesiveness because it is helping to tie everything in together in the room. A pattern on a wallpaper or a fabric may have different colors in it. And so we can repeat some of those colors throughout the room. Or if we have some sort of motif, say in a fabric or in a wallpaper, we repeat that in other areas of the room, and that right away will help connect everything in the room. So pattern is a fun way of adding variety to a room, but also a wonderful way of tying everything together. So I'd love to find out from you how you use pattern in your home. So please leave your design ideas and your design suggestions in the comments. And thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.